Maybe a long night, so I'm going to get going. I want to welcome everyone. I'll take a motion to open the meeting.
Motion.
Do I have a second?
Second,
All in favor, Mr. DeRoss,
Yes.
Ms. Valley,
yes,
and Mr. Hessian. So yes, that is a unanimous vote. Want to welcome everyone to tonight's special meeting of the Rockland Board of Sewer Commissioners. This meeting is being videotaped for playback later on WRPS and YouTube. The listings of the matter are those reasonably anticipated by the chair, which may be discussed at the meeting. And all items listed may be in fact discussed. This is a special meeting for the rate study that was conducted by Rockland Sewer Commissioners. And I'd like to start it with a brief summary, if you will, of how we got here. Just for the users, I'm going to read, this was published, but this is the first time the sewer commissioners or anyone has had the opportunity to really hear the final draft study, rate study in its entirety. It's going to be circulated to the town administrator, the board of selectmen, and the town accountant for their review and their comments before it is finalized. The one thing I want everyone to, we keep saying this, but I want everyone to realize that the sewer department does not receive any tax dollars. It's funded solely by the user fees that we collect from the users and new connections to the sewer system. So in a sense, those usual rates are actually a tax for the sewer. Now I want to give everyone a little background on how we got to this point. And to the best of anyone's knowledge, the sewer department has never had a concrete plan in place to look at the long-term outlook for the department, taking into consideration the facility, the infrastructure, or the town's projected growth. Now, there are a lot of reasons for this rate study. It was first discussed in 2019 about conducting one. It didn't go through. But since 2013, the sewer department's lost over $1 million just in user rates. That was confirmed by the previous town accountant. Now, that happened by failing to increase the rates to keep pace with the basic budget needs as it applied to keeping up with the antiquated equipment, the infrastructure, and required repairs and replacements. The sewer department also failed to go up in the fees that they charge to developers for connecting to the sewer system since 2004. Now, some of you, I'd like you to think back to all the projects that happened since then. We've had condos, apartment complexes, and hotels. Instead, that money appeared to be used for those using those development fees was supposed to go to the inflow and infiltration removal per the administrative order that was issued to the department in the town in 2006. And that was to use that money to remove the inflow and infiltration. Instead, I think that money went to backfill budget shortfalls and to keep the equipment actually running. Now, with the exception of the rate study that you're hearing tonight, I'm going to go through, you're going to hear a couple other studies that were done, and they were supposed to be done in compliance with the EPA order in 2006. And in 2007, the voters approved $100,000 in Article 56 at the annual town meeting to conduct both the facility study and the CWMP. But those funds were used elsewhere and there was no follow-up. And really, that's how we got to where we are today. So before we could proceed, the current Board of Commissioners had to get a handle on where we were financially. And we realized real soon that if we didn't increase the rates dramatically and right away, the financial situation would have just spiraled out of control. And you will see that in print tonight. So in January, we increased the rate by 25%. Now, before we could get into the position of doing a rate study, the town needed a real reality check, and that had to be done. And this is not, we're not just talking building a building here. We're talking building a very complex system of processes and equipment. So several things had to happen in a specific order to get an intelligent baseline of where the Rockland sewer system really was to eliminate any guesswork. Now, the first part of that was the commissioners had to first find out exactly what shape the wastewater treatment facility was in. So in 2019, we contracted with Wright Pierce to conduct a very comprehensive facility evaluation. The results came back in late 2020, and the study very bluntly indicated that the 63-year-old facility was way past due and in dire need of an immediate upgrade that would cost $49.1 million to complete. Now, I want to point out again that this study and the associated costs did not include the 13 pump stations or the 55 miles of infrastructure pipeline. Now, since 2020, with COVID, the dramatic price increases in raw material, the skilled labor shortage, and inflation, today, that estimated cost is very close to $75 million. And the longer we wait to delay the project, those cost increases are just going to climb. The next thing I want to point out is that, remember, any upgrade to this facility will not increase the capacity, which is fixed by permit at 2.5 million gallons per day. That's the 2.5 MGD you keep hearing. It's only going to allow us to handle and process what we're doing today. And so you know where we are today. The average flow through the plant is 2.8 million gallons a day, above our permit allowable. Now, right after the facility study, the next step was a comprehensive wastewater management plan. And that also was conducted by Wright Pearson, started in late 2020. And that comprehensive management plan takes a lot of things into consideration, such as what shape the equipment is actually in, what is the facility's long-term needs, how can we keep up with the current flow, and what are the other needs, such as the infrastructure, the pump stations. Wright Pearson also looked at the town's projected growth in the master plan, its plans for development, and how that will impact the flow of the facility. They spoke with every department in town to get their input. Now, they took all this information, and the goal is to try to figure out how much this, along with the everyday maintenance, is going to actually cost the residents. Now, the CWMP projects those requirements over the next 10, 15, and 30 years. It tries to estimate the associated costs and makes its recommendations to satisfy those needs. The final report was done through phase 1 and phase 2, and the final report is due at the end of April. Now, everyone knows as recently as June of 2022, we were hit with another EPA compliance order and a notice of violations. That along with the demand conditions contained in that order have only heightened the urgency to get these things done. And there is absolutely no negotiation of going back with this. This is something the town has to do. So that brings us to where we are tonight with the rate study. This began in mid-2022. We contracted with Weston Sampson to conduct this rate study. And this is a lot of work. It took in everything, the facility study, the CWMP, the sewer department. They looked at the sewer department's long-term capital plan, the EPA orders, the town's projected growth. It looked at our user rates, our budgets, and then it's going to tell us the goal is to how can we pay for those requirements over the next 10, 15, and 30 years. Now, when we went into this endeavor, the commissioners in Weston Sampson, the approach was, it was designed to bolster of much of our retained earnings or our upfront cash reserves because of both our short-term needs in the case of major equipment failures, as well as our long-term needs for an upgrade, because some of those upgrades are going to happen shortly. But the other goal was to minimize as much as we could the impact to the residents as much as possible. Now, tonight, the presentation is going to be made by Mr. Frank Acapinti of Weston Sampson and Matt Abrams, followed by a question and answer period for all of you. Now, I'm going to ask that everyone, we let Frank get through the presentation. The commissioners will be first asked for their questions. Then I'm going to go one by one, left to right, as you appear on my Zoom screen. And I'll ask each of you if you have a question. I'm going to ask that you keep it to one question. Then I'm going to go around again for further questions and a final tally to make sure everyone gets a follow-up chance. I'm going to ask that you keep your questions to the point and only on the subject of the rate study. Now, to ask a question, I need you to state your name and address for the record. And if anyone has any further questions after this presentation, you can submit them in writing to the Board of Sewer Commissioners within the following week up to March 16th for follow-up answers. And I will get you answers one way or the other. Now, the rate study will be posted on the Sewer Department website by Monday. If anyone wishes an advance copy, let me know. So with that, my first kudos, I want to thank my fellow commissioners. You guys worked really hard to help make this happen. There's a lot that went into this behind the scenes, and there's no way it could have been done without Sherry and Dan. So with that, I am going to turn this over to Frank of Weston Sampson. And Frank, you're on. Ken, I was only joking. No song tonight. You don't have the time. Frank, you're on.
Great, thanks, Chuck. I'm going to try to share my screen at this time. So let me know if you can see that. All right. And with that,
Mhm.
I'm going to start the presentation. Can everyone see that okay?
Yep.
Yes.
All right, great. So good evening and welcome. I want to thank Chuck as well as the other commissioners for working with us on this story study. And with me tonight also is Matt Abrams from the Abrams Group, who also worked with us on this project. So we worked with the Rockland Sewer Department that's managed by, we worked with the sewer commissioners in the Rockland Sewer Department, Chuck, Sherry, and Dan. We met with them, as well as other folks within the town to collect some of the information for this rate study. As Chuck mentioned, the Sewer Enterprise Fund, or Sewer Enterprise is funded directly through the rates and solely through those charges. So this is kind of overview of the purpose of the rate study. So basically, we're looking at three components of that sewer enterprise: the revenue that's generated from the rates and the bills, expenses, including operation and maintenance, as well as other capital costs, and then try to identify a targeted retained earnings, and that's essentially just a balance in the looking at it in simple terms. It's kind of that maintaining a balance within your savings, and the purpose of this is really to ensure that there's a long-term financial healthy retained earnings and balance in the enterprise fund, so that, as Chuck mentioned, all of the future upgrades and maintenance and operation requirements that are necessary to keep both the treatment facility and the source system, the collection system, up to date and operating. So some of the challenges that are associated with the operation and maintenance of their system and looking at how to structure the store rate is typically what we're seeing is store rates are increasing about 6% per year on average across the country. So when you're trying to balance the rate increases, the impacts to users, which are the town residents, dealing with the state and federal regulations or consent decrees or consent orders, and then trying to maintain an aging infrastructure. As Chuck mentioned, the sewer system is 60 plus years old, and the infrastructure is pretty close to that as well. So the two key items that are that were looked at as part of this rate study, again, includes that wastewater treatment plant upgrades, which is necessary through federal and state mandate and requirements. And then again, looking at the collection system, those are the pipes on the street that connect to your home. And there are both federal and state requirements and enforcements. And part of that requirement is to maintain and manage II in your system. And that's basically two components. One is infiltration, which is groundwater entering the system through leaking pipes. And then inflow, that's rainwater entering the system through either, again, illicit connections or some sort of improper connection to the sewer system. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt Abrams from the Abrams Group, and he's going to discuss some of the draft results of the rate study.
Thanks, Frank. Good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Abrahams from the Abrahams Group. Happy to be here talking about the results of our rate study this evening. Overview. O&M operating and maintenance expenses, projecting 3% increases annually in the next 10 years for capital improvements, looking at, I think it's on average $9 million annually for capital improvements, the majority of which is for the wastewater treatment facility and the upgrades that are planned there. And as mentioned here, there is the possibility that ARPA funding will help pay for some of those capital improvements. Throughout all the work that we've done in the rate study, we've been targeting a retained earnings balance of 15%. What that percentage represents is the balance as you compare it to the budget in a given year or total expenses you're dealing with a year that has been completed. 15%. So that's the balance of retained earnings compared to the budget or expenses. And as has already been mentioned a little bit, there's an urgency, or there's been a focus on trying to build up reserves to fund what's coming for the major capital improvements related to the wastewater treatment facility in the near future. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward here. Next slide, please. So one of the first things we do when we're working on a rate study is we try and create a baseline. What we think things look like if there aren't going to be any changes on the revenue side, meaning no rate action. It's another way to put it. So we compile all our numbers. That includes all the revenues, all the expenses, and we compare them to one another to see whether we're dealing with surpluses in a given year, deficits in a given year, and what the impact of either the surplus or the deficit would be on the retained earnings balance. And we project that forward for as long as we look. Initially, we started looking out 5 years for this project. And ultimately, because of the capital plans that are currently in place for the sewer system and for the treatment facility, we thought it made sense to expand that look beyond 5 years. We ended up settling on 15 years because if we did that, we were able to see the entire impact of all those capital improvements over that period. So this is your do nothing. This is your baseline. If there are no revenue changes, we put a graph together. That red-ish line on the top represents your target, the 15% that we just talked about. Blue line represents the projected retained earnings over the time frame, 15 years. And you can see that at the conclusion of the current fiscal year, which is FY23, we are looking at projections that show that retained earnings are a little bit above the target. And even in the next 2 fiscal years before you start to fall off the cliff, so to speak. And expenses at that point greatly outweigh revenues, which is why you see the dip that you do going forward.
You tap on him.
I tried.
Next slide, please. Thank you. So how do we keep that bluish line above or somewhat near the red line? Well, you can raise rates. That's definitely one option. So we focused on what we thought made the most sense to bring in enough projected revenue over the time period that we were looking at to keep the retained earnings around or at the target that we talked about, the 15%. And this is one of the options that we came up with, the one that we liked the best because of the smoothing, the consistency related to it.
I don't know.
So again, 15-year look. We had the first 8 years in terms of the rate increase, 10% per year in the consistency that we were talking about. 10% per year for the first 8 years that we're looking at. And that starts with the next fiscal year, the upcoming fiscal year of FY24. Then
Okay.
as we move forward here towards the back end of the look that we did over 15 years, we have the rate plan decreasing a little bit from that point down to 7% per year for 2 years, then 5% for 1 year, and then 4% for the outlying years. I'm sorry, 2% for the outlying years, all the way out to the end of the 15-year look in FY30. And again, our focus here was to try and be consistent as much as we could. We like to see level increases if possible. There's a consistency there. People can get used to that. I personally think that it's better than trying to hit a certain target every year where you might see more of a roller coaster effect. This is a more smooth way to look at it. And here's an updated graph, the same graph that we just saw a few slides ago, but with the projected revenue related to the rate increases that we just saw on the prior slide. So you can see that the blue line, which is your retained earnings projections, is well above the red for a significant period of time until it starts to dip downward pretty significantly, ultimately ending up around the target in the outlying years. So what is, oh, okay, go ahead, Frank.
So again, yeah, as you were mentioning, Matt, that hump is that buildup of reserve because we're anticipating those costs for the capital improvements, which is essentially the treatment plant and the II investigation work. So that's that buildup. And then this point is where the wastewater treatment plant upgrades begin. And you can see what that does to the reserves as that project progresses. It starts depleting the reserves, but ultimately it will balance out once we're closer to the end of that project. And again, the goal is with these, drastic increases in expenses and this roller coaster that you have here, how do you balance that out with the rate so that you're not seeing another 25% plus hike in future years?
Yeah, so just to add, oh, Frank, before you move on to the next, you go back to that prior slide. So just to add, to kind of reiterate, so even though that blue line is depleting, it's going downward, as you can see there around the 27, 28, 29 timeframe, that we have rate increases in there in each of those years. It's just that that's how significant these capital expenses are over that time period. And then as you get to the outlying years, towards the end of the 15-year look, we saw on the prior table, we had rate increases in the 2% range. So that's at that point, you have your revenues completely caught up to where your expenses are at that point. And you're just doing what I would call nominal increases in that time period. Okay, you can go to the next slide now. Projected sewer cash flow. This has the rate change revenue in there. So what this graph contains, the bars themselves going vertical contain the different expenses and the breakdown of different expenses in a given year. You can see there's a legend on the bottom that kind of guides you on that. The orange are your operating expenses, the gray that's right above the orange, and you can't, I guess you can see it in most years. Rate funded capital, so that's your capital outlay. That's not your debt, future debt. That's just capital outlay, some capital that's purchased in a given year. Yellow, existing debt, and there's not a whole lot of that. Actually, I don't even know if I can see any from memory. It's very small, your existing debt. And then blue is your new debt. And you can see that blue-ish part of the bar gets pretty significant as you move forward here. So that's your new debt related to the major capital improvements that are taking place in the future. You see the debt increases pretty significantly for that reason. The blue line is your projected revenues over this time frame with the rate increases that have been proposed on that prior slide. The green line is your projected retained earnings balance. And the little yellowy, orangey shaded area is what we're calling the targeted retained earnings. Now, we mentioned earlier that it was 15%. So that's just one number that we were targeting. On this graph, we're showing you a range. We generally, when we recommend rates or when we work on financial analyses for water and sewer rate studies, we usually operate off the assumption that reserves should be in the 10 to 25% range. And that's what we've presented here for you. And you can see that just like on the prior graph, the green is above the target for a pretty significant period of time. And then it comes down right in the target area that we're looking for as we get to the outward years. And the little orangey yellow boxes are what the rate is based on the increases. And then you can see the increased percentages right below that. Next slide, please.
Yeah, Matt, I would just add that those dollar amounts are the cost per CCF or 100 cubic feet of wastewater. So,
And whenever we do rate studies, whenever we start talking about rate increases, rate changes, we always like to present that in terms of dollars and the impact on certain users. In this case, we're looking at what we've calculated as the average residential user that uses just over 2,000 cubic feet per quarter. Under the orange header there, you can see the current bill amount based on that usage. The top row is quarterly, a per bill amount. The bottom row is annual if you add up the 4 quarters. And then as you go out to the right, based on the rate increases that we have in that proposed table a few slides ago, which we had as 10% per year, you can see the changes annually. So we start with the top row would be for FY24, about a $15 per bill change. That works out to be about a $61 annual impact. And then it goes upward from there annually. And then a comment at the bottom, how revenue expenses are likely to change after 5 years. I guess that comes with any study where you're doing projections like these. It's based on the best information we have at this time. It's based on a lot of assumptions, but of course those things can change over time. So we recommend that there are reviews done in the future just to make sure that things are still on track.
so this slide just kind of gives you a representation on how Rockland sewer rates compare to surrounding communities or communities with similar populations. So we looked at 11 other communities which averaged a sewer bill per quarter of roughly $197. And compared to Rockland, the average user for Rockland per quarter is about $164 roughly. And you can see that that Rockland is below those 11 community average for sewer rate. So if you're trying to compare, how is Rockland's rate compared to others in the surrounding communities or communities of similar size, this kind of graphically gives you an idea of where Rockland stands. It's not perfect. Obviously, each community has different costs and different that associated with rates, but this gives you at least a general idea of how Rockland's rates compare. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone and open it up for any questions that folks may have.
But before I go into that, I'm going to ask the commissioners if they have any questions. I'm going to start out with one. I'm not sure if I ask Matt or you, Frank. When you were using the calculations, when you were taking all the figures into consideration, was any projection given for new connection users, any number used in that equation, or not yet?
In the numbers I put together, no, we just went
Okay,
off.
so none of
the
that,
current-
new connections do not impact this particular presentation.
That's right.
Yes,
So in the future, and the reason for that is right now you're at capacity. So adding new users in the near future is not, foreseeable. But once the improvements take place in the collection system and flow can get removed, or excessive flows that are associated with what we call II inflow and infiltration, then that'll allow some additional capacity to add for new users.
I want to piggyback on something Frank said. What the residents are looking at as an example is that we're supposedly only have a 5-gallon pail of water. We've got 6 gallons in it. If we take out that extra gallon, we're still overflowing. So we've got to still reduce that to get some additional capacity. So Frank, could you go back into that slide in the beginning? I think it was the first graph you showed. Projected retained earnings. Do nothing scenario.
Sure.
And if you could put that up for a minute. Okay, that FY 22, 23, 24, 25, that hump, that's just showing the 25% increase we just recently did.
yes. The do nothing is based on all the current information. That includes projections related to your recent rate increase, yes.
Okay, and for Sherry and Dan, this also does not include the new fees we were talking about as far as engineering and I&I removal. That's not in this equation either. So Frank, with that, I believe we've arranged to revisit this at the end of the year or in 3 years, or
Yeah, I mean, typically you want to look at it, and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, at least after 2 years maybe, but I mean, we try to look at it as far out as 5 years and beyond, because we had that information when it comes to your proposed capital improvement program. But essentially you want to look at that on a regular basis.
well, like I said, I don't think they've ever really done this, and I'd like to, at least for the first couple of years, maybe just look at it at, a nice touchy-feely once a year to see where we are, so we get a real good handle on it, because once we start spending, I don't want to slip back into the red. With that, I'll open up to the other commissioners. Dan, do you have anything?
I have nothing.
Sherry?
I do have a question. If we achieve the projected retained earnings, does that pay for the entire plant upgrade?
Well, it depends on,
As estimated now?
are you-
The
okay,
projected
so
retained earnings for a year, is that what you're talking about?
Over
which-
the course of the study. So you were targeting 15%, and then the blue curve was the plant upgrade.
No, the blue curve was not the plant upgrade. The blue curve was the retained earnings projections.
Yes. And it was reduced because of the spending for the plant upgrade.
Yeah, I guess you could
Yep.
say that, yeah.
So
Okay, let me bring
we-
up that, let me bring up that slide so that we're, this is the slide that you're referring to right here.
yeah,
So the retained earnings is built up over that first, I guess you could call it, 8-year period.
No?
I think what Sherry's saying, Frank, is that is that blue line indicating what we're spending on the facility upgrade? Is that going to cover it?
Right.
Yes. So based on the information we have on the proposed capital improvement plan and based on what we have on projected earnings, and then what we're trying to achieve for retained earnings, this, again, you'd want to definitely revisit this as you progress, but based on the information we have today, this is with the proposed rate increases will pay for not only the treatment plant, but also the other expenses associated with operating and maintaining the sewer system.
So if I understand you, then whatever grants or other monies we receive is just gravy.
So definitely in the form of grants. Some of this analysis did take in consideration that low interest rate loans were going to be utilized to pay for some of the funding through the Department of Environmental Protection State Revolving Fund Program, or SRF. So which provides a low rate loan.
And for those out there that may be interested, we have spoken with Wright Pierce, Weston Sampson, and Veolia, who are going to use their financial groups to assist us in locating as much grant money as possible. Any more, Sherry? Okay, I'll go back to Robin. You should be the next one up. You've earned that right.
Those were some great questions, but I only really had one quick one. The $8.15, which was the first year 10% increase projected, are you targeting the first quarter of fiscal year 2024 for that? So meaning next July?
Yeah, that's a good question. So with the work that we've done, yeah, we are assuming, and this might not be a great assumption, but we are assuming that you're going to get a full year's worth of the new rate.
Okay.
That was my assumption, that was going to be implemented FY24.
So
Am I
July
wrong?
1st of
Yeah.
2023.
Am I wrong, Frank? Matt?
Yeah, that would be July 1st, correct?
Okay,
2023.
you're still up, Robin.
2023, yeah.
That was the only question I had so far.
Okay, then I will go as you appear right to left. I have Mary iPad.
Yes, I have the same question. I caught where it was per quarter $164 and something like $699 yearly for 2-point-something cubic feet.
Yes, that's the average. Again, if you're an average user, your current bill is roughly about $163 per quarter, which would be the $655 a year.
Okay, 163 and 655.
655 would be your yearly,
Yeah,
and the following it would be as you go up.
what would be the next one? Is it going to stay at 10%? Well, 10% of an increase is going to be a little more each year, right? About $15, did I say?
It'll be, for the first year to be $15.38, the second year to be $16.91, third
Yeah.
year to be 8, etc. 10% each year, steady.
And that would be like 2027,
Up to
2026,
28, up to
2027.
fiscal year 28.
Yeah. All right, that's all I got.
You know, Kevin, we might as well include you on this, Kevin Olson, if you've got something you want to say.
Yeah, Chuck, thanks. Yeah, sounds like still getting feedback here. Sorry, guys. Two questions, maybe, or maybe one comment, one question. Frank and Matt, you guys showed the treatment plant upgrades starting in 2026. There are some discussions about getting that started earlier, so I don't know if that will have much of an effect on how you guys ran things. So that's my first comment.
You're echoing pretty bad, Kevin. I gave them the numbers that does include the phosphorus system, if that's what you're talking about.
Okay.
Right. So Kevin, that is not when the work starts. That is when the debt starts taking effect.
Okay. I was hoping you'd say that. Perfect.
Yeah.
Second question, what did you guys use for SRF loan rate? Did you use 2%-ish?
Correct. And we understand that might be lower, possibly.
Yeah, 2% was the assumption for escrow.
I think that's a good assumption. Okay. Thanks.
Kevin, you're logged on in two places that's why you're getting the echo.
Yeah. All right. Well, those are my questions. Thank you.
Good.
Okay, the next one I have is Kim Kwong. Kim, you have a question?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Nancy Kearney. Nancy, do you have a question? No? Okay, Jack Ward. Do you have a question?
Yes, well, not just a couple of things to say. I'm just curious, is anybody here tonight from the Board of Selectmen? Town Administrator, anyone? No? That says a lot. First of all, I want to thank the sewer commissioners for all the hard work you've been doing to try and get this situation under control. And I appreciate this, the report from Weston Sampson.
Don't forget Matt and Ken. They did a lot of work on this.
Well, all parties involved. I mean, I'm not really sure. I mean, you've obviously had a lot of people working on this. It's very informative. And just in my case, and literally on the back of an envelope calculation, currently I pay about $128 a quarter in fees for sewer. And you know, that to me, that's reasonable. As you pointed out, with other cities and towns, we're not as expensive. A 10% increase is $12 a month, approximately $50 a year. 8 years from now, I'm paying on an annual basis $514. And 8 years out, based on a 10% increase each year, I will be at $925, which will be a quarterly increase 8 years from now of $102, which will put me at about $230 a quarter, which I understand it, I get it. This has got to be done. There are no other options because of previous mismanagement, not only at the sewer plant or department, but other areas in town. But thank you, first of all, to all of you. How does this affect future development in the town? I mean, there's been a lot of talk coming from the selectman's office about all sorts of improvements coming to the town. There are some that are expressing interest of increasing housing in the town. Is there going to be capacity to accommodate anything in the future?
Well, I think that's getting a little off the subject that of the rate study itself. Capacity is another issue. I'd like to just focus it on rates. I mean, as it stands now, I mean, it doesn't take rocket science to realize we can't add any more. We've got to correct the situation first. So I would say You know what, Frank, you jump in. You and I had this conversation today. I mean, I think any large development for the next probably year or two is really out until we can get some capacity.
Yeah, I think this is gonna set the stage in order to get on that track in the future to allow development. It's not gonna happen overnight. It's not gonna happen in the next couple of years, but it certainly sets up the stage for planning as far as having the proper funding, having the anticipated plan in place in order to identify excessive flows in the source system, remove those, to allow additional capacity and future development. But again, that doesn't happen overnight. It can happen not overnight, but it can happen sooner, but it would take a lot more money in a short amount of time. And the plan that's in place right now in order to address that is, again, taking in consideration how that would impact the future rates and the increases.
Thank you.
You know, I just got a text from Lori. She is watching on YouTube, Jack, just so you're aware. And there's probably, hopefully there's other users on there, because I as well, have, to be honest, I'm very disappointed at the turnout. The next up is Sheila Toho. Sheila, what do you got? Sheila? Nothing from Sheila. I'll go around one more time. Dan?
Your mic's off.
Dan, do you have any more questions?
No, I'm all set. Anything's, we've
Sherry?
gone through already.
Jerry, do you have anything else?
I'm all set, thank you.
Mary?
I just want to say that those that you're not getting an answer from, it might be because their microphone is off and they don't know it.
Okay. Jack, do you have any more questions, or
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
Kevin?
Yeah, Chuck, just real quick, and I did log out, so hopefully I
Yeah,
sound
a lot better, a lot better.
I apologize for that. But to Jack's question, I will just add, Chuck had mentioned that we are wrapping up phase 3, the final phase of the comprehensive wastewater management plan. And in addition to what Frank just said too, and you know, the whole capacity discussion, one of the things we are looking at, and Chuck, you and the other commissioners know this, is the potential to reroute flow elsewhere, you know, some flow away from the plant. Now that might mean, you know, constructing a new plant or joining up with, you know, a private developer, but to try and remove some flow in addition to reducing II to help with the overall capacity. So don't hold me to anything right now, you know, and if big if, the town chooses to go down that path in the future, it'll take multiple years to do that. But Jack,
Well, Kevin, you just hit the key on that. I think a lot of the people are looking at the next 1, 2, 3 years. And that's all I want to focus on right now. And I would say that and I think you and I both know, any engineer would know that realistically, that's out of the question.
Many years out. Yeah. So it's not a near-term fix by any stretch. So I'll just leave it at that, Chuck.
Yeah, but we are looking at that. So if
That's ultimately what I wanted to convey, that we are looking at it. So thank you.
Nancy, do you have any other questions? Nancy Kearney? Kim, do you have any questions? Sheila? Well, that's it. Listen, guys, and for all the effort you put into this, I want to apologize, but this is typical of the apathy we see, not just on something like this, but at the voting turnout as well. I'm embarrassed that this is the lack of interest that something like this received. But can't lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. Personally, I want to go on record. I told you guys earlier that I think this was a phenomenal piece of work. A lot of input from a lot of people went in there, from not just Kevin Olson and Wright Pierce and Veolia and Matt and Ken and Frank put a lot of effort into this. Sherry and Dan broke their butt on this as well. But at least for the first time, and I don't want to forget Robin. Robin kicked in with more effort on this than she should have. But at least the people can rest assured, at least we have a game plan to get there. Whether we can is totally up to you, the voters, and the powers to be. So with that, I guess I'll take a motion in the meeting. But again, guys, thank you very, very much for everything. I really appreciate it. All of you, the
You're
three of
welcome.
you. You too, Kevin. With that, I'll take a motion in tonight's meeting.
I'll make the motion to end tonight's meeting.
All in favor? Do I have a second? Okay,
Second
great.
that.
All in favor? Mr. Ross,
Yes.
Ms. Valley,
Yes.
and Mr. Hession's a yes, that's unanimous. Guys, thank you very, very much for everything you put into it. I do appreciate it, and the other commissioners appreciate everything you've done.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you for all your help.
Good
Thank
night,
you.
all.
All right.
Good night, all.
Take care.
Okay, I gotta figure out how to shut this off.